All right, so we're back with round 3 of this 9-round tournament. Definitely made sure to find that out. So for round 3, we're going to bring you guys what we believe is what I will, maybe not we, I speak for myself, what I believe is one of the strongest decks in the OPO2 meta, and that is Law. Law has gotten some crazy consistency options with Curly to Dawn and Curly to Dawn, and basically become a very powerful deck, right? Because what was Law's main issue? If it didn't see its Namis, if it didn't see its very long array of 1-drops, it really didn't get the ball rolling. But now with that card being able to consistently flip-flop it off of the board, we've gotten a very, very strong deck. So I'm excited to see what it can do versus our other deck, Whitebeard.
Yeah, and
So
we were talking about before about the many different ways that you can build even the more linear strategies like Zoro and Whitebeard, but Law with 2 colors and just the array of options that you have available to you. I mean, the world is their oyster, and I just want to see what type of options this Law player gave himself for this tournament.
no, definitely. And I think we just stick to the classic Straw Hat Supernova synergies that we have. What makes this matchup very interesting is the fact that the leader itself can pressure Law very, very well. Law's main weaknesses is the fact that they just don't have a lot of 2Ks, right? You try to supplement that with adding as many as you can, but you just don't have time to, space your engine in 2Ks very efficiently. So those 6K leader swings, they're going to do a lot.
And a lot more options to destroy these sort of very small blockers and or searchers in the form of Vista that we see from the Whitebeard player. So definitely a really good start from Whitebeard. And now we see here, Law used to be the king of 5Ks, but when you go up against a 6K, it becomes a little difficult.
It's really hard. What they started doing in the Eastern format is they started playing structure deck Zoro. I thought that was very interesting. If you guys saw a tournament that was done in Singapore, there was a Law player that got first place. What they were doing was playing the starter deck Zoro and just hitting Whitebeard for 8s consistently and flip-flopping that specific card over and over again. And here we see one of the newer cards from the new set, as in the Nico Robin. Nico Robin from the film starter deck. So Nico Robin's going to go ahead and trigger effect to summon a... I don't know what her condition for summoning is. I thought it was film cards, so I'm going to go ahead and look it up.
It might also be Straw Hat cards.
It might just be Straw Hat cards in general too. So let's go ahead and look up Robin from the film set. And Robin from the film set says, on play up to one film or Straw Hat crew type from your hand with a cost of 2 or less. So really, really solid for the Law deck as it allows you to flood very, very easily. Kind of cool.
And now we see 2 cards come down for the cost of 1 in this case. Maybe like Nico Robin is there for the games that you go first. It's very good on 3. And now we see from the Whitebeard just another 6. And like you mentioned before, you just kind of got to take those.
You kind of just got to take those. And because with the Law player, you can't really afford to block. If they do block this and they just, they start diminishing their game plan of getting to 5 characters on the board. But as you were saying, Whitebeard has some fantastic options in the form of Vista, who eventually becomes a 5K with the Moby Dick. Seaquake is really, really good in this matchup, and we'll see a 6. I do like how this Law's playing, consistently pressuring at 6, and now that the Whitebeard is at 2 life, let's see if he understands that he has to show some restraint this turn, because if he hits him down to 1, and the Whitebeard has Moby Dick, we're in for a bad time. So I'm going to go ahead and tap 3 again for the Nico Robin. Nico Robin going to go ahead and trigger effect to summon a Straw Hat or film type character of, Bartolomeo.
Yeah.
Which is a film card, I believe. Again, let's
it is in fact a film cover, and this is quite nice being able to flood the board this early on with some of the new options from OPO2. We're starting to see that it's not just Adon, he's including a lot of these new options, and he's gonna shambles the
Nami into what I suspect is the OPO1 Law. That's the star of the deck. Law's gonna go ahead and trigger effect. Going to go ahead and bounce. I believe he's targeting the Nico Robin.
Yep.
And then he's going to go ahead and summon a 3 cost or lower, which is going to be the Nami. Nami's going to go ahead and look at the top 5 cards of the deck. And basically,
this is where a lot of the card advantage for the Law player comes from. Just being able to recycle a lot of these Namis, a lot of these Bonnies and other scenarios. And, we see it. And so he's playing a lot, hedging a lot.
He's definitely playing the film engine heavily. And the film engine is really, really cool because did you know that a lot of the film engine cards just share the Supernova typing?
Oh, that's pretty cool. And Straw Hat typing too.
They do. So specifically the Zoro, the 7-drop Luffy, the 4-drop Zoro, and I believe the Brick doesn't have the Supernova, but those 2 are Supernova Straw Hat film cards. And the other are just Straw Hat film cards, which are just aligned exactly with what you want to do in the deck. He goes ahead and swings for 6. and goes ahead and combos out of it with a Nico Robin in hand. Now, that does make the card susceptible to the do, but since we have these weenie blockers, I'm assuming we're going to go ahead and chump block here, specifically with the um, Brook in hand. We can afford to just block as many cards as we want. So we're going to go ahead and play another do here. Do we see the Moby Dick with the last two? No, we're going to go down to 1 life, and this is most certainly has to be the Moby Dick version at this point in time.
And maybe he doesn't have it. Maybe he's actually waiting until one of the final turns of the game to develop it and just leaving Dawn
Just
open
surprise.
for a couple of. Because if he doesn't leave Dawn open that turn, he's very susceptible to just dying. And so I like the restraint. I like leaving 2 open. You know, he probably has a couple of defensive events in his hand. A lot of Whitebeard decks just across the board, regardless of the build, play high count of all of those. And I just want to see how the Whitebeard player defensively navigates this Law turn.
And we're going to go ahead and see a Bonnie. I do like the Bonnie coming down. We're going to go ahead and pay 2 to look at the top 5, looking for this a Supernova. We've definitely got a lot of options. It's also interesting that even though he does play the film cards, does he play Eustace Captain Kidd? There's just so many options with Law, and that's kind of like what becomes really interesting. And I'm liking the fact that this Law player is taking the time to explore the film options, as I do think they're very interesting, specifically for this deck. The fact that they can just flood the board so easily, very cool.
And maybe he probably determined that the film cards with their unique multi-typing was the best way to move forward with the consistency of the deck too. Oftentimes in set one of the only times that a lot of players would struggle is when their searchers would whiff, but in this build it looks like those are just actually never whiffing. So
it's very hard to. A lot of people have opted for the Curly to Dawn version, but I think this version is kind of interesting. We're gonna go ahead and put 2 Dawn on Nico. Just again, I love how the Law player is playing. They're swinging exactly with the just perfect number. 6 is a point of interaction, and then he's gonna go ahead and use the Law ability here. He's gonna go ahead and shambles, pay 2 to go ahead and bounce what I believe is gonna be the Bonnie. Summon the Zoro, and then swing for another 6.
Yeah, and I like you're saying, I do enjoy the fact that he's not overcommitting his Dawn into a single attack, even if the coast is seemingly clear with no life from the Newgate side. It's just we know that the events are too efficient to be used.
So I've learned my lesson, Fernando. In this weekend tournament,
Yeah.
this weekend tournament, I played against a Whitebeard player. They kept 3 Dawn up, and I thought to myself, they have 3 cards in hand with 3 Dawn up. No way is this guy gonna go triple Radical Beam. And I swung at him for like 16, and yeah, it was triple Radical Beam. I know it was actually triple guard point, but still
Same lesson. Same lesson.
the same lesson was learned. I don't think I swung with 16, maybe 14, and I just lost because of it. But definitely, you don't have to all in them. If you can survive their turn, you can go ahead and try to just play as defensively as possible. And speaking of, here we go and see Squard. Squard, when you have no life, is really, really good because it can just go ahead and still minus a character by 4K. So he goes ahead and minuses the Law, then Seaquakes it. An absolutely very powerful combo, but that's still 2 cards out of the Whitebeard player's hand.
Since it's not a cost, it's actually an effect to do. You don't have to pay a life, and you still get the -4 reduction. I do feel like now it's safe to say that the Whitebeard player just doesn't have Moby Dick in his hand, even if it's in his deck, because he would have developed it this turn for huge attacks. And now we just have to see if they have enough power without the Moby Dick to get through the line.
Yeah, so he definitely still has a lot of Dawn available. The Law player just kind of going lower and lower, and very much you don't feel too bad doing that. Let's see what happens here. He goes ahead and plays the 2-drop blocker without counter, Blenheim. We have a full board from the Whitebeard player. If a Moby Dick comes down, that Moby Dick is a 2 cost plus 10k to the board.
And it
Sorry,
does feel
plus
like,
12k.
and it does feel like the Whitebeard player still has a little bit of time. I doubt that he is going to get all in this turn. And the Law player has already shown that he prefers chip damaging more, which is definitely, from what we both agreed, just the right way to approach this matchup. Just doing 6 a bunch of times doesn't seem that difficult at all. At least the Law player has made it look pretty easy so far. So a lot of cards are going to be lost from the Whitebeard side, but he won't lose. He has one more turn to get to the Moby Dick, but we'll see how the Law player navigates here. Law player does need a few blockers at the end of this turn, or else it's looking a little dicey. But there is
And
one blocker
there
right there.
that is one of them. So we also do just have like the Brook, and funnily enough, we are at 10 Dawn. And if you just play the 7-drop Luffy, 7-drop Luffy will summon the Brook, which can summon the Nico, which can summon the Chopper. And you have a that literally summons a board for 4 characters with 2 blockers onto the board, which is really interesting. But maybe that's not exactly what we need to potentially win this game. We also have to put some pressure on the Whitebeard players somehow, while also deploying a defensive strategy. Not going to be too easy.
I feel like it won't be easy, but if any character can apply pressure while playing a swarm of blockers, it's definitely Law. We see
Definitely.
him do it many, many times. So.
Yeah. If anyone can do it, it's you. So let's see. And we'll see 1 Dawn on the leader, and man, just again playing perfectly. So we'll go ahead and swing for 6.
I want to also believe the Whitebeard player last turn opted to not use that many event cards in favor of just discarding 2Ks. He plays a lot of 2Ks in his Whitebeard deck. Definitely a defensive choice. Not necessarily bad. I actually enjoy having upwards of 12 in a Whitebeard deck, and it's just looking like this chip damage is piling on, though.
And we'll go ahead and see a Marco. Now, losing Marco feels kind of interesting here, but I like the fact that he's just defending all the way. He goes down to 5 cards in hand.
5. There's probably at most only 1 more attack coming this turn, so
that's definitely it. We have 4 cards left, so we're gonna go ahead and hope to see like a Tony Chopper. Yeah, this is the Chopper that we were aware of it. That's been there, I believe, since the beginning. I believe he's no.
Maybe it's the second copy, because I think he had one earlier in the game.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and bounce the Nami to play the Law that we're completely aware of. The Law's going to come down, and what are we going to bounce off the Law? Probably the Bonnie or the Nico Robin. We're going to go ahead and bounce the Bonnie, and then we're going to need another blocker here. And then we see another Bardo. So the issue is a couple of Seaquakes really does get us there, and if he just has Moby Dick, I don't think we get out of here.
Yeah, and I do like the overcommitting on the extra blockers, 3 in total this turn, just because you just don't know how many of them are actually going to survive going into the Whitebeard's turn. So I like just putting full defense up. You know that as many turns as you can take, you will win eventually. So it's just about surviving for the Law player.
So we'll go ahead and swing for 5 here. Fortunately, we don't see the Moby Dick. I don't I could have just seen this as a Law block, which would have been nice as well, just to keep a card in hand.
Nice, efficient block.
Yeah, it would have been an efficient block there. And if he chooses to go at the Law, you're completely okay with it, because that means you get another turn. But sure, we'll pitch a Brook to get out of the 5. Then he swings for what seems to be 7. And now 7 becomes a little dicey, right? We know that there's a Bonnie and Nami in hand and a Brook. Now we have 3 unknowns that we're working with, and I believe we have 1 Dawn up.
I do. So it's interesting, right? Because I do actually like the sort of chump attack, only going 5 at what's potentially a 6K block from the side of the Whitebeard player. Because if you do actually take a quote-unquote value block and then you just get your Chopper and your Bartholomew blown up through effects, now
you've just lost. The coast is clear. So. No, true. So maybe that was a good defensive move from the Law player. Those are the attacks that are very difficult to mitigate from the defensive player side, because it's very hard to know how you want to go ahead and do them. So we'll go ahead and see 3 cards removed there. 2 cards left in hand. Those are all the cards that were known. And now we go into the unknown.
There is 1 Dawn open, so definitely the possibility of being a Radical Beam in there. Like you were saying before, do they play Radical Beam moving into OPO2? Do they not?
I mean, it's hard to know, because it's not even just moving into OP2, is the fact that you're also playing film cards. So like your deck is Film, Supernova, Straw Hat. There's just a lot going on. It's going to be very difficult to know how, like, what your deck is really trying to do. So he's just swinging with bases here, kind of keeping his Dawn. Like this is something I find interesting from a lot of Whitebeard players, but your Dawn's just there as like for fun.
For fun. Well, having effective use for your Dawn is certainly an interesting conversation from the Whitebeard side. I just want to believe that with a Moby Dick this turn, it would have been trivial. These attacks would have been so huge that. So I want to see how a Whitebeard player that's currently 2-0 in the tournament, probably the first time he hasn't seen the Moby Dick in the tournament. How does he mitigate a game like this? Because you just have to win every game, right? And there's just some games you don't have that powerful card. So I just want to see him navigate through this sort of adversity. So
Definitely. No, it's very interesting. Like you definitely don't go like 2-0, but like just this is what we were talking about. This is why the Moby Dick had to be banned. Can you just imagine like what happens if he just sees that one card? And we do have the Radical
there's a
Beam.
radical beam there as well.
So that card it's just in the deck. It's a card that is in the deck.
He decided it is staple for me.
Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and see a Marco here and keep 2 Dawn up, 3 in hand, right? And now it becomes a very difficult game. We have 2 blockers. And what
This
are
just
we
has to
gonna
be,
do? It just
flurry of
everything
attack.
is now we have to probably win on this turn. One of these 4 attacks has to go through. If there's a Zoro in hand, then I mean you have one more surprise card. But I doubt it at this point in time. He has 2 cards in hand. What it could be is going to be very difficult. I really don't know what the Law player can do. I think this
So
turn
if
is
we just
just
attack
Dawn placement.
base with all our cards, how much Dawn would that be? It would be 1 to the Zoro, 2 to the Nico Robin, 1 to the Law, and that leaves us with 6 Dawn open. And that also takes away essentially the opponent's entire hand, assuming all of them are actually live cards.
So let's say they're all 1Ks. In doing that, Fernando, we have lost the game because then he has 2 blockers up, and that Law is not going to get through 2 blockers. So I think we have to push him on numbers that he has to block, and then have an attack that could then therefore not be blocked. So he's going to go ahead and swing here for 6, which is a 1K from hand when he blocks
Okay.
this.
So that forced a block, so maybe that is
That's kind of crazy, no? Oh, man. So we're going to go 6 again.
The Whitebeard player maybe...
And that's a 2K. All right. And then what do we do here?
Keeping his events close to his chest, the Whitebeard player definitely it has to, you at least we believe, be 1 +3 or +4 event in his hand. Do you just assume that the entire Whitebeard's hand is dead from this point forward?
I don't. I mean, with 2 Dawn up, you have to kind of respect them, but you also don't get another turn. So you definitely don't, like, you have to play without respecting them, I guess. So the prior turn, you had to show some sort of restraint, which I think the Law player did an excellent job of doing. But this turn, you have to, I think, swing for the fences. It's just, how do you do that with Whitebeard's large body? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And how large are these attacks supposed to be? This Zoro for 6 is a little dubious because this is probably one of the more pivotal attacks, but it does draw out an event.
So it is a pivotal attack to us, right? Because there's information that is not, given to us, right? If there is a rusher in hand, which we're gonna go ahead and and there we go. And that is information that's not privy to us. So this is gonna go ahead and take a block here, and it looks like the last card in hand is just dead. So we're gonna go ahead and put 2 Dawn into the Law.
So
and if he has a guard point or a Radical Beam, we lose. But if he doesn't, then we take it, and it does look like it was squared. So there we go. Law player being able to get out of it in the end very narrowly. Very, very narrowly by the skin of his teeth.
Just looking back at how the attacks and how the blocks occurred, if that's... Does squared have combo power?
Or, it does not.
It does not? Okay, so yeah. So that is exactly, the last card in hand being a blank is what determined the game there at the end. Because if that squared... If that squad ended up having any sort of guard power, he could have guarded the pivotal Zoro attack that we were mentioning before, but instead he had to use a Radical Beam on it, and that's what defined the ending of that game.
No, swinging for 6s is very good, especially on turns like that versus the Whitebeard leader. What got a little dicey is the fact that he had double blocker, right? So we were aware there were 4 possible attacks. We were unaware of what was in the Law player's hand. And that's where it comes down to. If he had one more rusher, whether it be Monkey D. Luffy or the Zoro card, we had to be sure that, that we had to play around as if we didn't have that, since we didn't have that knowledge. And I think knowing that, some of the attacks looked a little weird, but then once he played the Zoro, it all came together. And the Law player played it, I guess, to the best of their abilities.
And it might seem awkward simply because of how difficult it is to go wide against a 6K base body, but Law made it look like that's probably the only option that they have, because if they try to go with tall attackers, they just get Radical Beam, they just get guard pointed, and I feel like just going 6 a bunch of times really did look efficient in that game.
I mean, just think about it. He swung for 6 and he triggered an above counter of 4K.
Yeah, and multiple
So
2Ks.
yeah,
So
and multiple, because that's the thing. Whitebeard just plays in excess of those cards, and eventually, like if you don't fall into those traps, like if you swing at them for sevens, you're just hitting them at an inefficient number. If he swung at him for eight, then he just falls into a big radical beam problem, which
mhm.
would not give him enough dawn to then win the game.
how do you
Funnily enough,
feel? How do you feel about a few turns prior to the final turn of the game? The Whitebeard player had a few King Doos in play, and the Law player had tapped characters. So how do you feel about just clearing the board in that sense? Like, he had enough time, I feel.
I think you could have played it certainly a little bit different. I don't. I mean, the Marco blocking there was interesting, right? Because I believe he still had a card that could have countered out of it, and then he could have Marco and revived the Marco by pitching the Squard later, because then you use the
Yeah,
Squard as technically a counter-powered card. But I
yeah,
don't think it really would have gotten you anywhere. I think at the end of the day, the Law player just had the right cards.
right.